If you maintain life safety systems for a public high school, you learn very quickly that people are terrible witnesses. After every emergency drill, teachers turn in compliance forms with completely conflicting accounts. One claims the alarm rang at 10 o'clock sharp. Another swears it was 10:05. A third insists the south exit doors were jammed shut when they pushed the crash bars. I do not rely on what people tell me. Years of managing building automation have taught me that synchronized telemetry is almost always more reliable than human recollection. I trust digital event buffers, even when every witness agrees. My name is Arthur Pendleton. I am the facilities manager at Oakridge High School. I have held this position for 9 years. I am responsible for the physical plant, life safety compliance, and mandatory safety drill documentation for 1,400 students and staff. My office is room B-12 in the basement, directly beneath the main administrative wing, down where you can hear the faint hum of the main boiler, the rhythmic clatter of the cafeteria dishwasher 2 doors down, and the heavy, muffled thud of footsteps passing through the concrete ceiling above. On Wednesday, October 15th, at 1:42 p.m., Vice Principal Greg Harris came down to B12 to hand over the weekly maintenance sign-off sheets. He smelled faintly of damp wool and floor wax. Before leaving, he stood by my desk, checked his watch, and made a casual complaint. He told me that Tuesday's evacuation drill had taken 14 minutes, 2 minutes longer than our state compliance target. He said the delay happened because Period 3 teachers in Wing C were slow clearing their classrooms, and that students in the south parking lot were crowding over the yellow chalk line in Assembly Zone 4 to block the wind. I pulled up my master safety spreadsheet to check the entry. As part of my job, I log 3 specific timestamps for state reporting: the manual alarm initiation, the total building clearance, and the panel reset. But I had not executed a drill on Tuesday, October 14th. I told Greg our monthly state-mandated fire drill was scheduled for Thursday, October 16th, at 11:20 a.m. He looked at me, his hand resting on the metal doorframe. "Arthur, you were the one who scheduled it." "No," I said. Greg paused, then laughed once, assuming I was joking. He said he spent 15 minutes standing in 52-degree weather without a jacket because the horns went off right in the middle of his budget meeting. He named 2 other administrators who stood next to him in the lot, complaining about the cold. I did not argue with him. In facilities management, arguing about recollection is a waste of effort. I simply pulled up the desktop interface for our Notifier NFS320 fire alarm control panel on my workstation. The fire panel stores all system activity in non-volatile memory. Every pull station, smoke detector, duct sensor, and reset command is written sequentially with a hard network timestamp. I queried the event log for Tuesday, October 14th, filtering for the entire school day between 7 o'clock a.m. and 3:30 p.m. The query took 3 seconds longer than usual to populate, the server buffer lagging briefly as it pulled the raw hex codes. When it loaded, the log returned 12 lines. All 12 were routine automated system heartbeats, sent every 45 minutes to verify communication with the secondary battery backup. Between 1 o'clock and 2 o'clock p.m. on Tuesday, there was no alarm initiation, no zone trip, and no reset. The panel had remained in normal standby all afternoon. I paused. My initial assumption was a serial communications failure between the main display board and the local event recorder. Equipment fails. Database index is corrupt. That is routine. To verify the panel status, I cross-referenced the alarm data with our building management system. Oakridge operates a Johnson Controls Metasys automation server running on a machine in B-12. The fire panel is hardwired to this server through an isolated relay module. The instant a primary alarm registers, The relay opens and triggers an automated HVAC lockout. Dampers snap shut in 4 seconds to block smoke distribution, and supply fans drop to 0 static pressure. I opened the trend logs for Air Handling Unit 3, which serves Wing C, the wing Greg specifically mentioned as being delayed. I typed in the parameter window for Tuesday, October 14th, accidentally selecting October 13th first before correcting the date range to 1 o'clock through 1:30 p.m. The trend graphs were flat. Supply air temperature maintained a steady 68 degrees. Fan speed remained constant at 85%. Damper position indicators showed a static 20% outdoor air mix. No lockout command was issued. No mechanical state changed anywhere in the ventilation infrastructure during period 3 on Tuesday. A faint tightness settled in my chest. Not panic, just the sharp, irritating friction of 2 facts that refused to align. I checked the Valcom IP public address server log next. An evacuation drill requires an audible broadcast, a recorded horn chime followed by an automated voice message routed through 34 speaker zones. The server writes a raw log entry every time an audio stream is initialized. I audited Tuesday's activity. The log listed 4 entries for the entire day. All 4 were scheduled class transition bells: 8 o'clock morning intake, 11:15 lunch shift, 12 o'clock lunch shift, and 2:45 dismissal. There was no audio broadcast at 1:15 p.m. No evacuation tone was generated by the software, and no microphone page was routed through the administrative desk. At this point, 3 separate digital systems, the fire alarm panel, the building automation server, and the IP audio system, were reporting constant baseline operation throughout Tuesday afternoon. To settle the issue once and for all, I accessed our Avigilon IP surveillance network. We run 64 camera feeds throughout the school, recording continuously to a local drive array in B12, synchronized every 60 seconds to an external atomic clock server. I brought up the video archive for Tuesday, October 14th. The interface hiccuped twice, buffering as it retrieved the high-definition footage. I configured a 4-quadrant split screen on my monitor. Camera 04 covering the main lobby, Camera 1, 2 covering Assembly Zone 4 in the south parking lot, Camera 18 covering the Wing C central corridor, and Camera 22 covering the west exit doors. I set the playback time to 1:10 p.m., 5 minutes before the alleged evacuation, and ran the video at normal speed. At 1:10, Wing C was quiet. The hallway was clear, as expected during instructional time. Through the narrow door glass of room C112, Mr. Henderson was visible at his whiteboard writing equations in green marker. Across the hall, in C114, Mrs. Vance sat at her desk supervising a quiz, resting her head on one hand. Upstairs, a distant locker door slammed, echoing down the concrete stairwell. At 1:15 p.m., the timestamp on the video feed ticked forward without a break. No one entered the hallway. No alarm strobes flashed. The visual strobe units mounted along the cinderblock walls remained dark, square, and silent. I didn't scrub forward. I forced myself to sit in my chair, arms crossed, and watch every single frame in real time. At 1:16, a student in Wing C pushed open the door to room C-108, walked 12 paces down the linoleum corridor to the drinking fountain, leaned down for 4 seconds, took a drink, and walked back inside. At 1:17, on camera 12, a gust of wind caught a stray yellow maple leaf in the south parking lot. The leaf tumbled across the empty asphalt, bounced over the painted yellow chalk line marking Assembly Zone 4, and slid under the tire of a parked blue sedan. Nothing else moved in the lot. The grass on the retention berm swayed slightly in the 12-mile-per-hour northwest breeze. At 1:18, The exact minute Vice Principal Eris claimed 1,400 people were actively streaming through the crash doors. I leaned closer to the monitor. On camera 18, the Wing C corridor remained completely clear. On camera 22, the crash bars on the west exit doors did not budge. The magnetic holders held the heavy steel doors flush against the wall. On camera 12, Assembly Zone 4 remained entirely empty. At 1:21, Mr. Henderson paused his lecture in C112 to cap his marker and erase a column of numbers. At 1:25, a custodian passed camera 04 in the main lobby, pushing a gray trash bin on wheels, his brass keyring jingling against his belt. I watched the quad screen until 1:30 p.m. At 1:30, the period bell rang, logged properly by the audio server, and students stepped out into the hallway with their notebooks, moving normally, chatting casually, filling the corridor with movement. I checked the frame rate and network integrity parameters on the player. There were no dropped frames. The bit rate remained steady at 4 megabits per second. The timestamp matched the atomic clock server down to the millisecond. The recording was complete and uncorrupted. I sat back in my desk chair. The basement office was still, saved from complete silence only by the steady pulse of the supply fan. I read every timestamp again. Nothing changed. The physical reality was absolute. According to every digital system, every event log, every trend line, and 60 minutes of video footage in this building, Tuesday at 1:15 p.m. never happened. According to everyone upstairs, it did. I sat in my office chair for 5 minutes, watching the 4 camera channels loop on my monitor. Every digital metric told me that nothing had occurred yesterday afternoon. But in facilities work, when an operational record contradicts human testimony, your first duty isn't to speculate. It is to look for clerical error. I opened our administrative shared network drive. The school maintains a compliance directory where safety reports, fire marshal inspections, and monthly drill logs are archived for state audit. If Greg had executed a drill on a different day, or if he had accidentally misstated last month's report, the PDF would be in that folder. I sorted the directory by date modified. At the top of the list was a document titled Drill Record 1014. The network metadata showed it was created yesterday afternoon at 1:35 p.m., exactly 5 minutes after Greg claimed the building had been reoccupied. I opened the file. It was a scanned copy of an official State Department of Education life safety compliance form, completed in dark blue ink. I recognized the handwriting immediately. It belonged to Vice Principal Greg Eris. The top line recorded the date, October 14th. The second line listed the time initiated, 1:15 p.m. Total evacuation time, 14 minutes, 22 seconds. Weather conditions, 52 degrees, overcast, wind 12 miles per hour northwest. Below the metrics, in the handwritten comment box, Greg had noted, Wing C exit congested. Zone 4 overflow into driving lane. Students crowding yellow curb line. At the bottom of the page were 2 signature lines. The first was signed by Vice Principal Eris. The second was signed by Deputy Carl Miller, our campus resource officer. I zoomed in on the scanned signatures. Blue ballpoint pen. The ink had bled slightly into the wood pulp fiber of the standard state form, leaving tiny feather marks along the loops of Deputy Miller's script. This was not an electronic signature or a digital autofill. A physical piece of paper had been signed by 2 administrators yesterday afternoon in the main office and fed through the scanner feed. I tried to construct a rational explanation. Administrators are busy. Sometimes, in larger districts, staff fill out compliance paperwork prior to an event to save time during state audits. It is against code, but it happens. If Greg and Deputy Miller had pre-signed the form anticipating a drill that was subsequently canceled or postponed, That would account for the document. Except Greg had just stood in my office complaining about the cold air. He had described the wind. He had described the delay in Wing C. I printed a hard copy of the signed state report, clipped it to my wooden inspection board, tucked a flashlight into my belt, and unlocked the door to B12 to begin my physical walkthrough. The basement hallway smelled of damp concrete and floor wax. As I walked toward the central stairwell, the building was operating in its normal, late-afternoon rhythm. Overhead, the 4-inch steel water pipes for the boiler system hummed with steady pressure. From the gymnasium above, the muffled, rhythmic squeak of sneakers echoed down the corridor, followed by a coach's whistle. I took the stairs up to the first floor and stepped into Wing C. Wing C is our oldest instructional wing, built in 1972. The corridor is lined with green steel lockers, concrete block walls, and recessed fire pull stations every 75 feet. I stopped at pull station C-04, mounted on the wall outside room C-112. If someone had manually initiated an alarm yesterday without triggering the central automation panel, they would have had to physically pull down the glass brake lever. I shined my flashlight onto the red housing. The plastic breakaway tie was intact. Clear, slightly yellowed with age, unbroken. I paused, resting my thumb against the plastic housing. A quiet doubt surfaced. Was it possible someone had used a master key to bypass the mechanical switch? I dismissed the thought almost immediately. Opening the panel casing with a key still opens the tamper circuit, which forces a priority trouble signal straight to the main board. No such signal existed in the buffer. I walked 20 paces further down the hall to pull station C-05, unbroken tie, dusty casing. At the end of the hall, pull station C-06 near the west exit doors showed the exact same state. The levers were all sealed in their raised, armed positions. I reached the west exit doors, the primary egress route for Wing C. Under safety regulations, these heavy steel doors are held open during the school day by wall-mounted electromagnets. When the fire panel drops power during an alarm, the magnets release, and pneumatic door closers pull the doors shut to isolate fire zones. I inspected the magnetic catch plates mounted on the wall behind the doors. The surface of the steel electromagnets was covered in a thin, undisturbed layer of gray dust. If the doors had released and slammed shut yesterday afternoon, the metal plates would show impact marks and broken dust lines. The surface was smooth. The magnetic coils were powered, holding the crash doors flush against the wall. I pushed down on the stainless steel crash bar of the west exit door and stepped outside into the cold air. The sudden draft hit my face, smelling of damp earth and dying leaves. I walked around the brick exterior of Wing C, following the concrete path that leads down toward the south parking lot. The south parking lot is where Assembly Zone 4 is located. It is designated for freshman homerooms. According to the signed report on my clipboard, 400 students and 12 staff members had stood in this lot yesterday at 1:15 p.m., waiting 14 minutes for the all-clear signal. The parking lot was quiet. 6 faculty vehicles were parked in the far row. The asphalt had been sealed 2 years ago, leaving a dark, textured surface that showed bright yellow paint lines clearly. Along the southern edge of the lot, separating the parking asphalt from the grass retention berm, is a 6-inch concrete curb. Painted along the top face of that curb is a continuous 3-inch wide band of bright yellow traffic paint, the marker for Assembly Zone 4. I walked over to the curb and stopped. The previous day's wind had scattered dozens of leaves across the asphalt. Lying along the entire length of the yellow curb line was a thick mat of dry brown maple leaves. I knelt on the cold asphalt. I reached out and picked up a single brown leaf lying directly across the yellow paint, where Greg claimed students had crowded to avoid the wind. The leaf was dry and curled tightly at the edges. I pinched it gently between my thumb and index finger. It snapped instantly, crumbling into sharp, brittle flakes that drifted down onto my work boots. That was what dry leaves do under pressure. They shatter. If 400 teenagers had stood on this 6-inch curb yesterday, shuffling their feet, shifting their weight, stamping against 52-degree cold for 14 minutes, they wouldn't just have moved the leaves. They would have ground them into a dark, powdery mulch. I leaned down further, shining my flashlight horizontally along the top of the curb. For 60 feet in either direction, the carpet of leaves remained untouched. I lifted a second leaf, then a third. Beneath them, the yellow paint was pristine, coated only in a thin film of autumn dust. No scuffs, no rubber marks, no crushed leaf veins. As I knelt there, a soft gust of wind rustled the maples at the edge of the lot. A dry red leaf tumbled across the open asphalt, bounced once over the curb, and settled quietly on top of the pile. I stood up slowly, brushing asphalt dust from the knees of my trousers. I turned back to look at the school building. The rear facade of Wing C sat silent against the overcast afternoon sky. Up on the roof, the housing for Air Handling Unit 3 hummed at its normal, steady pitch, blowing a thin plume of exhaust air into the cold breeze. I held the wooden clipboard in my hand, looking down at the crisp blue ink of Vice Principal Eris's signature and the official stamp of the State Department of Education. I looked from the leaves to the building one more time. I couldn't make the numbers fit. Every digital system I maintained agreed with the physical ground beneath my feet. Every person inside that building remembered something else. One of them had to be wrong. I stepped back inside through the west exit doors of Wing C. The heavy steel door clicked shut behind me, the magnetic latch engaging with a sharp mechanical thud that echoed down the quiet hallway. It was 3:20 p.m. The final dismissal bell had rung 35 minutes ago. Most of the students had cleared out to the buses, leaving the school in that familiar, hollow end-of-day quiet. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead in 60 cycles, reflecting off the freshly polished linoleum. I walked down the main corridor toward the administrative wing to return my clipboard and complete my afternoon perimeter check. In facilities management, you don't confront staff with discrepancies until you understand the scope of the error. If there was a miscommunication, or if staff were confusing yesterday's alleged drill with a previous exercise, I needed to observe how deeply that confusion ran. Outside the main office, Frank Kowalski, our head night custodian, was pushing his yellow mop bucket along the terrazzo floor. Frank is 61 years old and has worked for the school district for 22 years. He is meticulous about floor maintenance and complains regularly whenever student foot traffic ruins a fresh coat of wax. I stopped near his supply cart. "Evening, Frank." Frank stopped his mop, leaning both hands on the wooden handle. "Evening, Arthur. Glad the rain held off today. Yesterday was enough of a mess." I kept my tone conversational. "How do you mean?" "The entrance mats in Wing C," Frank said, shaking his head. "Spent 45 minutes with the carpet extractor after 5 o'clock yesterday. All 400 freshmen coming back in through the west doors after that 1:15 drill. Dragged in a whole layer of wet leaf mulch and damp gravel from the curb. Turned the rubber backing completely black." I looked down at the Wing C entrance mats 30 feet behind him. They were dark gray, dry, and clean. I had walked over them 5 minutes ago. There was no salt residue, no dried mud, and no crushed leaf dust in the fibers. "Did you extract them yesterday evening?" I asked quietly. 5 o'clock sharp, Frank said. "Took 2 full buckets of dirty water out of the reservoir. You can check the chemical inventory in B12. I used half a gallon of the floor stripper to get the mud lines out." I made a mental note to check the B12 supply log. I already knew what it would show. The floor stripper jug on the shelf was sealed. its plastic pull ring unbroken when I grabbed my flashlight an hour ago. Before I could reply, the door to the nurse's clinic opened, and Sarah Lynn stepped out carrying a stack of student medical charts. Sarah is our full-time school nurse. She is quiet, extremely organized, and keeps precise medical log entries required by county health regulations. "Arthur," she said, adjusting her glasses, "did Greg mention the inhalers?" "Which issue?" I asked. "Yesterday during the evacuation," Sarah said, tapping her folder. "2 freshmen in Zone 4 were without rescue inhalers at 1:15. Standing in 52-degree wind triggered bronchospasms. I logged nebulizer treatments at 1:35 p.m. once they came inside." "You logged treatments at 1:35 p.m. yesterday?" "Of course," Sarah said, slightly offended. "Every administration of medication during a safety event gets time-stamped in the medical logbook." I nodded slowly. "Right. Standard procedure." "Next time," Sarah added, leaning against the doorframe, "tell Greg to let the health office know before he drops the panel. If I have advance notice, I can stage the emergency kit by the south exit." I didn't answer. I walked past her into the main administrative office to file my clipboard. Deputy Carl Miller, our campus resource officer, was sitting at his small desk near the front counter, logging his daily incident report into a county laptop. Miller is 48 years old, a retired sheriff's deputy, and notoriously literal. He does not speculate. He writes down facts, badge numbers, and military format times. His signature was the second signature on the blue ink state report sitting on my clipboard. I leaned against the wooden counter. "Carl, got a second?" Miller didn't look up from his screen. His fingers kept typing. "What's up, Arthur?" "Just reviewing the paperwork for the state audit," I said, keeping my voice level and neutral, "checking the details on yesterday's 1:15 drill." Miller hit the enter key, saved his entry, and looked up at me. His expression was completely blank. "What about it?" Line 3 was slow. Greg put it in the comments. "I was looking at the assembly zone layout," I said. "Where were you posted?" "South parking lot," Miller said immediately, "right by the front bumper of my cruiser. The blue Impala parked in space 12. I was holding the driving lane open so delivery trucks wouldn't cut through while the kids were on the asphalt." I remembered the video feed from camera 12 on my monitor in B-12. At 1:17 p.m. yesterday, camera 12 had shown space 12. The blue Impala was parked there. The driving lane was completely open. The asphalt was empty. No deputy was standing by the bumper. No students were on the asphalt. "Did you notice anything unusual while you were standing out there?" I asked. Miller frowned slightly, his brow furrowing. "Unusual how?" "Anything out of order? Equipment, timing, crowd behavior?" Miller rubbed his chin, thinking for a moment. "Nothing with the kids. They were cold, complaining about the wind. Standard drill behavior." He paused, looking out the glass window toward the front parking lot. "Only thing I noticed was a leaf." The room seemed to grow very quiet. The distant hum of the office copy machine sounded loud in the background. "A leaf," I repeated. "Yeah," Miller said, shrugging. "Draft caught a yellow maple leaf off the berm around 1:17 p.m. Big one. Tumbled right across the empty asphalt. Bounced over the yellow curb line in Zone 4 and slid right under my front driver's side tire. I remember looking down at it because I almost stepped on it while I was watching Wing C clear. I felt a cold, sharp sensation at the back of my neck. I had watched that exact leaf on my monitor in B-12 less than 2 hours ago. I had sat in my office watching the high-definition archive from camera 12. At 13:17:04 on Tuesday afternoon, a gust of wind had caught a single yellow maple leaf on the retention berm. The leaf had tumbled across the empty asphalt of Space 12, bounced over the yellow-painted curb, and slid directly under the front driver's side tire of Deputy Miller's blue Impala. The camera had recorded that leaf at 13:17:04. The digital timestamp on the video feed was hard-locked to an external atomic clock. The file was uncorrupted, continuous, and verified by my building network. The video proved beyond any technical doubt that Space 12 was completely empty when that leaf moved across the pavement. And Deputy Miller had stood by his cruiser in Space 12 at 1:17 p.m. yesterday, watching that exact leaf slide under his tire. "Arthur," Miller asked, looking at me, "you all right?" "I'm fine," I said. My voice sounded flat, even to my own ears. "Just checking the details for the audit." "Forms signed," Miller said, turning back to his laptop. "Greg and I both verified it. Total time 14:22. File it and move on." I turned around and walked out of the main office. I walked down the central hallway toward the stairwell, passing classrooms where teachers were packing up their bags for the day. Mrs. Vance was wiping down her blackboard in room C114. Mr. Henderson was sitting at his desk, grading papers in C112. Every single person I passed possessed a complete, detailed sensory memory of yesterday afternoon at 1:15 p.m. None of them were lying. Frank never embellished floor maintenance. Sarah documented medication administration with rigid accuracy. Miller's incident reports were notoriously literal. None of them were confused. They weren't describing a vague impression or a collective guess. They were describing lived physical reality, a reality anchored to the exact same physical events that my cameras had recorded in an entirely empty building. Their memories didn't contradict physical reality. Their memories mirrored physical reality down to the motion of a single leaf on asphalt. The only thing missing from the digital record was 1,400 human bodies. I walked down the concrete stairs to the basement, opened the heavy steel door of B12, and stepped inside. I didn't turn on the overhead lights. The only illumination in the office came from the blue glow of my 3 computer monitors resting on the desk. On the center screen, the quad-view player was still open to Tuesday, October 14th, at 1:17:04 p.m. On camera 12, the yellow maple leaf lay trapped under the tire of the blue Impala in an empty lot under an overcast sky. I sat down at my workstation, pulled the keyboard forward, and opened the master compliance calendar. Tomorrow was Thursday, October 16th. At 11:20 a.m. tomorrow morning, our state-mandated monthly evacuation drill was scheduled to execute. The system was programmed to drop power to the magnetic door releases, initialize 34 IP audio zones, send a hard alarm trigger to the notifier panel, and log 1,400 people exiting the building. I reached out my hand and placed my fingers on the mouse. As facilities manager, I have master administrative override authority. With 3 mouse clicks, I could delete tomorrow's scheduled drill from the system queue. I could cancel the trigger, lock the PA system, and prevent the horns from sounding. I looked at the blue screen, then down at the hard copy state report clipped to my board, signed, stamped, and certifying that the drill had already taken place 48 hours ago. If I canceled tomorrow's drill, I would be violating state safety regulations for a building where everyone believed the requirement had already been met. If I allowed tomorrow's drill to execute, 1,400 people would march out to Assembly Zone 4 to perform an evacuation they all remembered completing yesterday. I sat alone in the dark basement, listening to the steady, unblinking hum of the servers, and realized that I no longer knew which choice would prove what was real. I stayed in B12 until 10 o'clock on Wednesday night. When you manage physical plant operations, you are trained to assume that local failures are contained until proven otherwise. A corrupted local drive or a failed hardware clock in B-12 is a localized issue. But modern life safety systems communicate with external infrastructure. To determine if the discrepancy extended beyond our basement server rack, I audited our outbound system integration logs. Under county regulations, our fire panel connects through a dedicated fiber gateway to the Central Emergency Dispatch Office in Mansfield. When an alarm trips, the system automatically pushes an encrypted event packet to alert emergency responders, so incoming calls are not treated as false alarms. I logged into the gateway's external management console and requested a transmission report for Tuesday, October 14th, between 1 o'clock and 2 o'clock p.m. I expected the transmission log to be empty, matching my local panel history. At 1:14:52 p.m. on Tuesday, the gateway recorded an outgoing data packet sent to the county emergency dispatch server. The packet contained 5 fields. Event ID 88412. Source: Oakridge High School main panel. Type: manual drill initiation. Status: transmitted successfully. Acknowledged at 1:14:53 p.m. I queried our local router's internal switch port logs for that exact millisecond. Port 04, the physical Ethernet jack connected directly to the fiber gateway, showed 0 outbound bytes transmitted at 1:14 p.m. The local interface had sat completely idle, registering only baseline network keep-alive frames. The county dispatch server had received, acknowledged, and logged an automated alarm notification sent from my hardware across a physical cable that my switch logs proved carried no data. Next, I accessed the State Department of Education's online life safety compliance portal. Public schools are required to submit digital drill verifications within 24 hours of execution to remain compliant with state funding mandates. I pulled up Oakridge High School's 2024 compliance dashboard. There was an active entry for Tuesday, October 14th, at 1:15 p.m., auto-populated via a system sync at 1:36 p.m. yesterday afternoon. It listed our school facility code, the 14-minute evacuation duration, Vice Principal Aris's administrative ID, and Officer Miller's state badge number. The status line was displayed in green text: verified and approved, state compliant. The institutional network outside B12 had fully processed, logged, and ratified an event that my physical hardware had never executed. Every external database connected to our building showed that the drill had occurred. Every internal sensor, video drive, and mechanical relay inside our building proved that it had not. I did not go home Wednesday night. I slept for 2 hours on the vinyl couch in the B12 break room, waking up at 5 o'clock a.m. on Thursday, October 16th. The basement had grown cold. Only the overhead ductwork vibrated in the darkness, circulating fresh air through the empty corridors above. Thursday, October 16th, was the date set on our official master calendar for the monthly state-mandated fire drill. The automated execution sequence was programmed in our building automation schedule queue for 11:20 a.m. I sat down at my desk, poured a cup of black coffee from the break room pot, and brought up the real-time system diagnostic dashboard on my center monitor. At 5:40:12 a.m., 3 hours before staff would arrive, the building automation system initiated an unprompted sequence. On the HVAC graphic for Wing C, the green icon representing Air Handling Unit 3 suddenly turned yellow. The event log updated line by line. AHU-03. Smoke purge cycle initiated. Return air dampers. Closing. 4 seconds. Supply fan. Ramp down to 0% static. I stood up from my chair and looked at the fire alarm panel mounted on the wall 6 feet away. The panel display remained in normal standby. The green power LED was solid. The red alarm LED was dark. No trouble buzzer sounded. No smoke detector on the floor above had tripped. Yet 40 feet away, inside the mechanical ductwork, the heavy steel dampers of Air Handling Unit 3 slammed shut against their rubber stops, with a dull, hollow clunk that vibrated through the B12 ceiling. At 5:41 and 42 seconds a.m., the automation log recorded a second entry, AHU03. Purge complete. Return air dampers. Opening. 20% air mix. Supply fan. Ramp up to 85% capacity. The fan motor spun back up, returning air circulation to baseline. The building automation system had executed a safety lockout sequence engineered exclusively to prevent smoke migration during an active building fire, without receiving a trigger command from the fire alarm panel. 10 minutes later, at 5:52 a.m., a second anomaly appeared on the access control console. Our school uses 24-volt DC electromagnetic holdopens on all hallway fire doors. At 5:52 and 4 seconds a.m., the voltage telemetry bar for Wing C dropped from 24.1 volts DC down to 0.0. Down the basement hallway, I heard the faint, simultaneous click of 4 magnetic door catches releasing along the first-floor corridor above me. 3 seconds later, the current restored itself. Up in the corridor, no doors had swung shut. The power cut had been just brief enough to release the magnetic seal without allowing the door weight to overcome inertia and engage the pneumatic closers. At 6:15 a.m., the IP public address server logged an internal system activity event. An automated network test routed to the 34 speaker horns installed across campus, verifying audio line impedance in Zone 4. The signal lasted 4 milliseconds. The physical building was rehearsing. Without an alarm trigger, without human intervention, and without a command from my console, the HVAC dampers, door magnets, and audio servers were executing isolated, silent dry runs of the exact mechanical steps required for a full building evacuation. It was not failing. It was preparing. By 7 o'clock a.m., the first staff members began entering the building. I left B12 and walked up to the main hallway to perform my morning light and emergency fixture checks. Custodians were wheeling trash barrels through the lobby. Buses were idling in the front loop, their diesel exhaust drifting past the glass entrance doors. Rain had started falling, a steady, cold October drizzle that wet the asphalt outside. At 8:15 a.m., my hand radio crackled. "Arthur, you copy?" It was Vice Principal Greg Arris. I unclipped the radio from my belt and pressed the button. "Go ahead, Greg." "Just confirming we're still green for the 11:20 a.m. drill today," Greg said, his voice relaxed and casual over the speaker. "Weather's turned rainy, so let's keep the outdoor assembly tight. We'll do a quick head count in the lot and get them back inside fast." I stood in the middle of the Wing C corridor, holding the plastic radio casing. "Greg, we executed yesterday's log." There was a brief pause on the channel, followed by a faint click of static. "Right," Greg replied, laughing softly. "That was Tuesday's run. Today is the scheduled monthly compliance follow-up. We've got to clear the state calendar before the end of the week. See you at the panel at 11:15. He unkeyed the mic. Every person in this building believed that Tuesday's evacuation was an accomplished fact, and that today's 11:20 a.m. drill was a routine follow-up required by the administration. I walked back down the stairs to B12 and sat at my workstation. The task scheduler displayed a single pending command on my left monitor. Task YD 1016. Drill. Scheduled time, 11:20 a.m. Action. Fire alarm. Master trigger. Status. Pending. My hand rested on the computer mouse. As facilities manager, I possessed the local override authority to cancel the task. With 2 clicks, I could purge the execution command from the system buffer. If I purged the command, the 11:20 a.m. alarm would not sound. The HVAC dampers would stay open. The doors would remain latched. The students would sit in their Period 4 classrooms, and the day would proceed without interruption. I looked at the hard-copy State Fire Marshal report clipped to my wooden board, signed in blue ink by Greg Harris and Deputy Miller, certifying that the October evacuation requirement had already been satisfied 2 days ago. If I allowed the 11:20 a.m. drill to run, I would be triggering a high-decibel life safety alarm in a facility where 1,400 people possessed vivid memories of completing the exact same protocol 48 hours prior, for a drill that my digital logs, physical leaves, and uncorrupted video feeds proved had never occurred. If I canceled it, I would be stopping an automated system that was already opening its dampers, testing its speakers, and dropping its door voltages in preparation for an event it was determined to complete. I sat in the quiet basement office, watching the digital clock creep toward 11:20. 10:45 a.m. I left my hand on the mouse. 10:50 a.m. The task remained pending. 10:55 a.m. I still hadn't made a decision. At 11:10 a.m., I picked up my clipboard, locked the door to room B-12, and walked up the concrete stairs toward the main floor to stand by the fire alarm panel. At 11:15 a.m., I stood in the main administrative corridor outside the front office, 3 feet from the red cabinet of the fire alarm panel. Outside the glass entrance doors, the October rain was coming down steadily, blurring the windshields of the yellow school buses parked in the loop. The hallway was filled with the ambient noise of a normal school day, a passing class, the low rattle of a janitor's cart, the distant hum of the main boiler down in B-12. Vice Principal Greg Harris walked up, holding a metal clipboard. He looked relaxed, smelling faintly of coffee. Deputy Carl Miller stood beside him in his uniform, holding a stopwatch. Greg looked at his watch, then smiled at me. "Right on time, Arthur. Let's get this logged so we can get back to warm offices." I didn't answer. I looked at the red panel casing. Inside, the main board was quiet, its green power LED solid and steady. At 11:19 a.m. and 45 seconds, Deputy Miller clicked the top button on his stopwatch, resetting the digital timer to 0. The digital clock on the wall above the office door ticked forward. At 11:20 a.m., the system executed. The alarm didn't stutter. High decibel horn chimes sounded simultaneously through 34 speaker zones across the campus. In the hallway, the red visual strobe lights mounted along the cinder block walls began flashing in synchronized white pulses. Down the corridor, 4 sets of magnetic door catches released with a heavy metallic clunk, and the heavy steel fire door swung shut under pneumatic pressure, isolating the wings. High above us in the ceiling cavity, I heard the sudden, deep rumble of Air Handling Unit 3 shutting down, its return dampers snapping shut to isolate the air supply. The system was working. It was executing every relay drop, every power cut, and every audio command exactly as engineered under state compliance standards. Students stepped out of classrooms in orderly single-file lines. Teachers held open emergency exit doors, shouting instructions over the rhythm of the horns. Greg Harris stepped out through the main exit doors, pulling his jacket hood over his head against the cold drizzle. 14 minutes today, Arthur. Let's keep them moving." I followed the crowd out into the rain. I walked down the concrete path behind Wing C, my work boots splashing through shallow puddles on the asphalt. The rain was cold, soaking through my jacket, but I didn't hurry. I kept my eyes fixed on the rear parking lot. 400 freshmen marched out through the west exit doors, led by their Period 4 teachers. Their hoods were up, their shoulders hunched against the damp chill. They moved across the dark, wet asphalt toward the southern edge of the lot, toward Assembly Zone 4. I walked over to the edge of the lot and stopped 40 feet away. The yellow-painted curb line marking Zone 4 was wet, the bright yellow traffic paint glistening under a film of rainwater. The thick carpet of dry maple leaves I had inspected yesterday was still there, now soaked dark brown and flattened against the concrete by the rain. The students reached the edge of the lot. No teacher gave an instruction I could hear over the rain. Officer Miller didn't raise his hand. Yet all 400 freshmen came to a halt at the exact same moment. They did not step up to the curb. They did not crowd against the yellow paint. They stopped exactly 3 feet short of the painted line. 400 teenagers stood packed together in the cold drizzle, crowding shoulders, shuffling their feet in wet puddles, leaving a broad, empty 3-foot strip of open asphalt between the front row of their boots and the yellow curb line. They stood 3 feet back, leaving the yellow line entirely untouched, giving space to the empty asphalt, as if something was already standing there. Officer Miller walked up to the edge of the line, checked his stopwatch, and looked at his clipboard. He didn't tell the students to move forward. He didn't ask them why they were standing 3 feet back in the driving rain. He looked at the open space, then down at his watch, completely unbothered by the empty gap. I stood in the rain, watching 400 people silently honor a boundary that wasn't there. At 11:34 a.m., 14 minutes and 22 seconds after the initial alarm, Vice Principal Aris gave the all-clear signal over his hand radio. The teachers turned their classes around, and the students marched back inside through the west doors, leaving the wet yellow curb line completely bare. At 11:50 a.m., I walked back down the concrete stairs to B12. My jacket was damp, water dripping from the hem onto the concrete floor. I shut the basement door, walked over to my desk, and sat down in front of the 3 monitors. I needed to review the live system logs for Thursday, October 16th, for the physical drill I had just witnessed with my own eyes, standing in the rain. I brought up the fire panel management interface on my center screen and queried the event log for Thursday, October 16th, filtering for the parameter window between 11 o'clock a.m. and 12 o'clock p.m. The query loaded in 2 seconds. The display showed 16 lines. All 16 were routine automated system heartbeats sent every 45 minutes to verify communication with the secondary battery backup. Between 11 o'clock a.m. and 12 o'clock p.m. on Thursday, October 16th, there was no alarm initiation logged. There was no zone trip. There was no panel silence command. The fire panel reported continuous standby operation throughout the entire morning. I sat very still in my chair. I opened the trend logs for the building automation server next. I queried Air Handling Unit 3 for Thursday, October 16th at 11:20 a.m. The supply air temperature graph was flat at 68 degrees. The fan speed remained static at 85%. The damper position indicator showed a continuous 20% outdoor air mix. The automation server recorded no mechanical state change, no relay drop, and no HVAC lockout during period 4 today. Finally, I pulled up the surveillance network archive for Thursday, October 16th. I loaded camera 18, covering the Wing C corridor, setting the playback timestamp to 11:20 a.m. today. On my monitor, the video showed Wing C at 11:20 a.m. today. The hallway was quiet. The doors were held flush against the walls by their magnetic catches. Through the glass window of room C112, Mr. Henderson was writing on his whiteboard. At 11:22 a.m., a student walked down the corridor to the drinking fountain, took a drink, and walked back inside. I replayed the footage. Then again. I scrubbed back to 11:19 and watched every second tick forward a second time. Nothing changed. On my screen, today at 11:20 a.m. was an uninterrupted, ordinary school morning in an empty corridor. I leaned back in my desk chair, looking at the screens. I opened the event buffer for Tuesday, October 14th again, the date everyone remembered evacuating, the date recorded on the signed State Fire Marshal report sitting on my clipboard. Tuesday's log was still blank. Thursday's log was now blank. According to every digital system, every event log, every trend line, and every video recording maintained by this facility. Neither drill had ever taken place. The horns I had just heard ringing 20 minutes ago did not exist in the audio server history. The heavy steel fire doors I had watched slam shut had never lost voltage, according to the access control panel. The 400 teenagers I had stood next to in the cold rain had never left their desks, according to the cameras above their heads. I picked up the wooden inspection board from my desk. On it was Vice Principal Aris's handwritten state compliance report, signed in blue ballpoint ink, recording a 14-minute evacuation on Tuesday at 1:15 p.m. I opened my desk drawer, pulled out a second blank State Department of Education compliance form, and laid it on the desk beside the first. I picked up my pen. I looked at the date field. I could write down today's date, Thursday, October 16th, and record the 14-minute evacuation I had just watched in the rain. If I filed today's form, the state portal would reject it as a duplicate submission for a monthly requirement that their external servers already listed as verified and complete for Tuesday. If I threw both forms in the trash, I would be discarding official state records certifying an event that 1,400 human beings possessed identical, detailed memories of completing twice. I sat in the basement office, listening to the faint vibration of the air handling units running overhead. For 9 years, I had trusted telemetry over memory. Sitting alone in B12 with 2 compliance forms resting on my desk, I wasn't sure either one deserved my trust anymore. The equipment refused to contradict itself. The people refused to contradict one another. And I was the only one standing between them, holding a blue pen, trying to figure out which version of this school I was supposed to be maintaining.